Hello students and welcome back. We're going to talk about a few other types of queries that you can utilize that may be beneficial for you to know and understand and access to help you on your project. Now this, once again, we left off, we were talking about calculated fields. The other thing that may be of interest to you, well, there's a few. There you might have a make table query, a crosstab query, this summation query. So if you want to do summations or anything, this is how to do them. And so those three I'm going to try to go through a little quicker. As well as the parameter query. Parameter query may be useful to you in terms of, well, I'll just show you. So let me say that I want to hide all patient records. This is a parameter query, so I want to hide all patient records. And what I need to do is I need to utilize first name and last name, the patient's first name and last name, in order to open the table and show the results. So what I can do is I can create parameters, what is known as a parameter query. So I can come in here and I can open a bracket and I can say enter patient last name and close brackets. And I can do the same thing over here. In fact, I'll just copy this over here and change last name to first name. To first name. Alright. And now when I run the query, it's going to tell me to enter a patient's last name. So I have to know a patient's first name and last name to be able to do this. So let's see one. We'll do, as a test, Steve and Nelson. So what we're going to do is we're going to run this. Okay, so Nelson, and we say okay, and the first name Steve, and we say okay. Did we type it in wrong? I have to know, cancel. Oops, it's Steven. So see, because I put Steve instead of Steven, I got a error message. Oops. So let's run this again and make sure that we can get it. Close our tables. Go ahead, run our query. Last name, Nelson. Say okay. First name, Steven. Just as it was spelled. Okay, there we go. Steven Nelson has been in 4 times, or 5 times, excuse me. And there's his diagnosis, and we can go to the diagnosis table and the patient table. So Steve Nelson's patient ID is 115879920. So picking up where I dropped off, we were looking at Steve Nelson. We went to the patient table to get his patient ID number, so that way we can come to the diagnosis table and filter on the patient ID number. Now, why is it not filtering correctly? Well, because we have these dashes in there. These dashes don't need to be in there. There we go. Now we can filter out, and we can see that Steven Nelson has been diagnosed with 5 different times, and we can look at the information for that particular one. So that again is a parameter query. It's just entering in brackets into a field and making them and putting some text in between to tell people what to type in. Okay, and the reason I move last name and first name is because I wanted the last name to appear first. If I did not do that, if I had first name first, then I would have to know the person's first name and then their last name. Okay, so we filtered out, utilized the parameter query like that. Another way you could do it is date of birth and last name if we had a patient's date of birth, right? So different ways. So that's how you do a parameter query. It has nothing to do with this up here. Don't mess with that. That is not a parameter query. Okay. The other thing, so something else you can look into is you can see this totals row right here. And what we can notice, so I'm not going to sort these anymore. It's not sorted. Not sorted. So what we can notice is we can total how many times a particular patient has been diagnosed by coming over here and doing a count. Now count will count both numbers and and word or date values. So basically, as long as the particular record has information in that field, so if there's information in that field, the record will be counted. You can count, and it will allow you to count how many diagnoses a particular person has. In this case, we want to make sure that we're going to sort by a patient's last name. We'll just do it in reverse order this time. Okay, reverse order this time. So let's go ahead and run that, and we can see that. And so the reason that we don't get a total count, we see how many times they have been diagnosed by a particular doctor for a particular diagnosis, right? So if I wanted to, and so the diagnosis, each time there's a different diagnosis, it's going to count that diagnosis. Okay, if they were diagnosed twice with the same diagnosis by the same doctor, it would say 2 times. Okay, but in this case, it doesn't. It just tells us that they are how many times they were diagnosed for a particular disease by a particular doctor. So we're still going to have 494. Now, if I wish to change that and say, well, how many times has a patient been diagnosed for all, I can just delete the doctor, I can delete the date diagnosed, and I can delete all these other fields. I can say run, and now there I go. I have how many times a patient has been diagnosed. It looks like most people have been diagnosed 5 times. Right, and so that's something you should take into consideration. Okay. So let's go ahead. So that's utilizing totals. Now your values, so you can do a summation of this, right? So say you have people who purchase things, right? You can do a such as in your project, you can do create a query to where you sum up the purchase amounts by each individual. Okay, and it will tell you that can give you a clue as to maybe some good information for your project. Okay, some useful information. So that was the totals. You'll notice once again that you get a new row is inserted to the this area down here where we perform our query, get our query results. So once again, if I click on totals, it allows me to select different things. You're probably going to be interested in things like count, max, min, average, sum. Some maybe to some extent standard deviation if you have things you can compare against. That may be useful to you, but in all actuality, you'll probably stay in with these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 categories. Okay. All right. The other thing that might be of interest to you is the other type of query is a crosstab query. So in a crosstab query, what you can have is, let's do this. So let's cut this. We're going to add the doctor name. Okay, the doctor name field. And in crosstab, what you'll notice, so let's, over here in crosstab, what you'll notice is that we have a row heading, a column heading, and a value heading. Okay, so you have to have at least three fields in your query, and they have to be and so you'll set them up like this. So if I want to see, let's say I want to see how many times a patient, so let's see what I can do. Hold up. So if I put the doctor name on the row heading, that means on my rows, so going, or the records, we call them records, right? On my records, that they would show up there, the doctor would show up there. If I put the patient last name, okay, if I put the patient last name as a column heading, then it's going to give me the patients all across there. And if I say diagnosis is going to be my value, okay, and I try to run this, notice it says you cannot specify group by expression or where in the total row for this column. So we have to do an aggregate function. So we have to do, instead of group by, we're going to count the number of times they were diagnosed by a particular doctor. So we're going to run that, and we'll notice that Young, whomever that may be, first name, was diagnosed by Terrell Kenyon 3 times, Daniel Maury once, and Rachel Larson once. Okay, so Young was diagnosed by these three individuals, and it just gives you a count to show you. All right, so it seems like a lot. In fact, it may even be wise to switch it up and say this is a column heading and this is a row heading, and let's do this by ascending. Go ahead, run. There we go. And now maybe it makes a little bit more sense. Right here we can see the last name of the patient and the number of times they were diagnosed by what individual. And there we go. So there you go. All right. So let's go back. So that's a crosstab. Remember, you have to have at least 3 columns, and one of the columns has to be summed or allow some aggregate data to occur. And aggregate means like sum or count or average. And it also depends on what type of data is in there. If it can be counted or if it can be summed, you have to make sure you know what data is in your different fields. So very important again. Okay, so that was it for queries. We're going to go ahead and the next thing I'll go on to is reports. Have a good one.